On August 8, 1963, a Royal Mail staff member aboard a travelling post office peered out into the darkness of the British countryside, confused by a red signal light that shouldn't have been there. Moments later, 15 men in ski masks and boiler suits swarmed the carriage, armed not with lines of code, but with coches and pickaxe handles. By the time the sun rose over Buckinghamshire, the gang had vanished with 120 bags of cash. In 1963 money, it was £2.6 million. That is a staggering £60 million in today's value, mostly in small, untraceable used notes. It remains one of the largest cash heists in history, a crime so massive it literally affected the British economy. Authorities initially assumed this was a paramilitary operation, perhaps the work of seasoned commandos or an international syndicate, but the reality was far stranger. The masterminds were a motley crew of London gangsters, antique dealers and club owners who treated the heist less like a military operation and more like a darkly comic road trip. They were the Bonnie and Clyde of the swinging 60s, but with more hair gel and less competence. They played Monopoly with the stolen loot while hiding from the police. They hired a getaway driver who couldn't drive the getaway vehicle. And yet, for a few terrifying hours, they held the entire nation hostage. This wasn't just a robbery, it was the ultimate analog hack, a systematic dismantling of physical security protocols that exposed the hubris of an entire institution. But, as we'll see, executing the crime was the easy part. Surviving the money was the real challenge. Welcome to the story of the Great Train Robbery. The morning of August 8th broke with chaos. The Royal Mail train, known as the Up Special, was found stationary at Sears Crossing, its crew battered and bound. The initial reports were fragmentary.
Announced new measures to bolster the pound sterling, urging the public to maintain a sense of calm resolve during this period of adjustment.
The driver, Jack Mills, had been savagely beaten over the head with an iron bar. Enter the flying squad. This was the Scotland Yard unit dedicated to armed robbery, known on the streets as the Sweeney. They arrived at the scene expecting a smash and grab, only to find a crime scene that looked more like a magic trick. The train had been stopped in the middle of nowhere, the high-value carriage detached, and the money spirited away without a single witness raising the alarm. According to police logs, the sheer scale of the theft was paralyzing. A reward of £260,000, a fortune in itself, was immediately posted. But as the investigation spun up, the theories grew wilder. Was it an inside job? A political statement? Then names started to circulate in the London underworld. These weren't invisible spectres, they were men with bizarrely public personas. There was Bruce Reynolds, a man who fancied himself a sophisticated businessman, wearing expensive suits and driving Aston Martins, and Buster Edwards, a former boxer who ran a flower stall but lived like a king. It seemed impossible. How could a florist and an antiques dealer orchestrate a raid that required military precision? The press dubbed them the Great Train Robbers, turning them into instant folk heroes. But behind the glamour, the police noticed a pattern. This wasn't just one gang, it was a merger. The investigation would eventually reveal a collaboration between the Southwest Gang and the South Coast Raiders. It was a criminal supergroup formed for one specific purpose: to crack the uncrackable mobile vault of the Royal Mail. And they almost got away with it, if not for a bottle of ketchup. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. To understand how they did it, we have to look at the victim, the Royal Mail. In 1963, the Royal Mail was the circulatory system of the British economy. Before digital banking, physical cash had to move, and it moved by rail. The train in question was a travelling post office, a TPO. It ran from Glasgow to London, sorting mail on the fly. Because it was a bank holiday weekend in Scotland, the train was carrying a record amount of cash flow,
millions in used banknotes destined for London banks to be destroyed or redistributed. The security system was, in theory, robust. The high-value package coach was reinforced and staffed by workers who were essentially human firewalls. But the system suffered from a critical vulnerability we see in cybersecurity all the time: security by obscurity. They assumed no one knew which train carried the cash or when. But the real flaw was in the infrastructure. The train relied entirely on visual signaling systems, traffic lights for trains. If a light turned red, the train had to stop. There was no radio communication between the driver and the central hub. This was an air-gapped system, but one with a physical interface that anyone could access if they had a ladder. The robbers didn't need to hack a computer, they just had to hack the driver's eyes. They knew the train had no backup comms. If they could force a stop in a dead zone, the train was a dead duck. It is a classic example of hubris. The Royal Mail believed the sheer weight of tradition and the stiff upper lip of their staff would deter criminals. They were moving £60 million worth of cash in wooden carriages defended by unarmed men. It wasn't a vault, it was a lunchbox. And just like a modern exploit, the attackers had done their recon. They knew exactly where the firewall was thinnest.
If the Royal Mail was an arrogant institution, the men targeting it were the definition of hungry. Let's look at the two key players who drove this conspiracy. First, the brain, Bruce Reynolds. Reynolds wasn't your typical thug. He was an antiques dealer who loved jazz, smoked expensive cigars, and wore thick-rimmed glasses that gave him an intellectual air. He hated the term crook. He saw himself as an adventurer. He was the sysadmin of the operation, the one who saw the big picture. Then you have the muscle and the wild card, Gordon Goody and Ronnie Biggs. Goody was a meticulous professional, a hairdresser by trade, who applied the same precision to crime. Biggs, on the other hand, was a petty thief who was actually struggling to pay for his house. He was the script kiddie brought in because he claimed to know a train driver. These men were united by a shared background, childhoods marred by the Blitz, a distrust of authority, and a pivotal hustler moment where they realized regular jobs would never get them the life they felt they deserved. Reynolds had been obsessing over a train heist for years. He studied the movements of the Royal Mail like a hawk. But he realized his Southwest gang didn't have the manpower. He needed to scale up. He reached out to the South Coast Raiders, a rival firm. This was a dangerous move, like two rival cartels teaming up for one job. The tension was high. In his memoir, Reynolds later wrote, "It was a military operation. We were an army, but they were an army of individualists." Their cover businesses, flower stalls, antique shops, clubs, were perfect fronts. They were cash-heavy businesses that could explain sudden influxes of wealth. But their social media of the day, the gossip in the pubs, was their weakness. They liked to flash their cash. The plan required a specific set of skills: a signal expert, a driver, muscle, and a transport team. They assembled 15 men. It was Ocean's 11, but with more warm beer and cigarettes. And this leads us to the critical convergence. A mysterious insider, known only as the Ulsterman, provided the schedule. We still don't know who he was, but without his zero-day exploit, the exact timing of the cash shipment, the hack would have been impossible. August 8th, 3 a.m., the heist begins. The gang positions themselves at Sears Crossing in Buckinghamshire. This is the exploit phase. Here is the hack in technical detail. They didn't cut the power, they manipulated the input. They covered the green signal light with a simple glove. Then they attached a portable battery to the red light circuit to power it up.
To the train driver, the system was reporting a legitimate stop command. The train, driven by Jack Mills, screeched to a halt. The fireman, David Whitby, climbed down to use the trackside phone to query the signal. He found the cables had been cut. He was immediately grabbed by the gang. "If you shout, I'll kill you," one whispered. Now the brute force attack. The gang swarmed the engine. Jack Mills struggled. He was a tough man who fought back. In the scuffle, he was struck over the head. This was the moment the gentleman's crime turned bloody. It changed the public perception instantly. With the crew subdued, the plan was to uncouple the high-value carriage and drive it further down the track to Bridego Bridge, where trucks were waiting. This is where the glitch happened. Remember Ronnie Biggs' job? He was supposed to bring a train driver. He brought a man named Old Pete. It turned out Old Pete had spent his life driving local commuter trains, not the massive English Electric Type 4 diesel engine. He couldn't even get the brakes off. It was a disaster. They had £60 million sitting there, and they couldn't move the vehicle. In a panic, they had to wake up the bleeding Jack Mills and force him to drive the train for them. Close up on the absurdity, the victim had to facilitate his own robbery. They reached the bridge. Now came the physical labor. There were 128 bags of money. They formed a human chain. 1, 2, 10, 50. They worked with manic energy. They left behind 8 bags because they simply couldn't carry any more. Time was ticking. They had 30 minutes. They tossed the bags into an Austin Lodestar truck and 2 Land Rovers. At 3:45 a.m., they drove off into the night. The authorities were left with a stationary train, a battered driver, and a cut phone line. The system had been crashed, the data exfiltrated, and the hackers were gone. But as they drove away, adrenaline pumping, they made a critical error. They assumed they had bought themselves days of silence. They were wrong. The gang retreated to Leatherslade Farm, a hideout about 17 miles from the crime scene. This was their server, the place to process the data, that is, money, before distribution. They tuned in to the police radio frequencies, an early form of counter-surveillance. What they heard terrified them. The police hadn't assumed they fled the country. They calculated a containment radius. They knew the gang was likely within 30 miles. The plan had been to lie low for weeks. Now the heat was rising. They had to split the money and run. They divided the loot, roughly £150,000 per man, about $3 million today. This is where the laundering became a nightmare. You can't just walk into a bank with £150,000 in used notes. They needed intermediaries, shady solicitors, and fences. The price of laundering skyrocketed. Some were paying 50 to 50% commission just to clean the cash. Back at the farm, the paranoia set in. They cleaned the place to destroy forensic evidence, but in their haste, they got sloppy. They played a game of Monopoly using real stolen money. It's a detail so cinematic it feels fake, but it's in the police report. They paid a man to burn the farmhouse down after they left to destroy the DNA. He took the money, but he didn't burn it down. He figured the police wouldn't find it. That was the fatal error. A local herdsman grew suspicious of the blacked-out windows and the strange truck. He called the police. When the flying squad raided Leatherslade Farm, they found food, sleeping bags, and the stash. And they found the fingerprints, specifically a fingerprint on a ketchup bottle and the Monopoly board. The encrypted identity of the gang was cracked by a condiment. The digital trail, or in this case, the paper trail, began to unravel. They found bank wraps from the stolen bags. The police identified the suspects within days. The anonymous hackers were doxxed. The hunt was on. While the police closed in, the robbers were trying to live normally with bags of cash under their floorboards. The contrast was insane. By day, they were fugitives. By night, they were buying cars and suits. Charlie Wilson, one of the leaders, was caught because he paid for his mother's house in cash. It's the classic nouveau riche mistake. You can steal the money, but you can't steal the discipline to hide it. Roger Corddry was caught because he rented a garage and paid 3 months in advance with 10-shilling notes. The widow who rented it to him thought it was suspicious and called the cops. The arrest scenes were chaotic. When they caught Roy James, the weasel, he led them on a rooftop chase across London, jumping from chimney to chimney like a movie villain. He was eventually tackled, carrying a bag of cash. Investigators were in disbelief. These men were amateurs in escape and evasion. One by one, they were rounded up. The trial was a media circus. In 1964, Justice Edmund Davies didn't hold back. He sentenced them to 30 years each. To put that in perspective, you could get less time for murder back then. The establishment was sending a message: do not touch the money. But the story didn't end with prison. It got weirder. Charlie Wilson escaped from prison in 1964. Then Ronnie Biggs escaped in 1965, scaling a wall with a rope ladder and fleeing to Paris for plastic surgery and then to Rio de Janeiro. Biggs became a celebrity fugitive. He released punk rock songs with the Sex Pistols. He sold t-shirts. He turned his crime into a brand. It was the ultimate influencer move before the internet existed. Meanwhile, Bruce Reynolds spent 5 years on the run in Mexico and Canada, living the high life before running out of money and returning to England, where he was promptly arrested. The Napoleon of crime ended up working as a consultant for a movie about the Great Train Robbery. The seizure details were grim for the authorities. Despite the arrests, the vast majority of the money, over £2 million or £50 million today, was never recovered. So where did the money go? Most of it was likely absorbed into the criminal underworld, fees for protection, laundering, and legal defense. It stimulated the black economy of London for a decade. The consequences for the men were severe, despite the glamour. Many died broke. Jack Mills, the train driver, never recovered from his injuries and died a few years later. The victimless crime narrative was a lie. But there is one loose thread that keeps investigators up at night: the Ulster Man, the man who gave them the schedule, the man who knew exactly which train held the cash. Theories abound. Was he a high-ranking Royal Mail official? A corrupt police officer? Some even speculate it was a state-sponsored act to fund black ops, though that's likely conspiracy fodder. In a deathbed confession, Gordon Goody named a postal worker, Patrick McKenna, as the inside man. McKenna apparently died poor, having never spent his share. Did he lose it? Was he robbed? Or was he just a pawn for someone bigger? The Great Train Robbery wasn't just a theft. It was the end of an era of innocence. It forced the world to upgrade its security. It turned physical cash into a liability. It was the moment crime went corporate. Bruce Reynolds, years later, said it was a high adventure, looking for the pot of gold, but the pot of gold was a pot of tears. Today, hacking a bank requires a keyboard, but in 1963, all it took was a glove, a battery, and the audacity to stop a train. Most of the money is still out there, rotting in buried trunks or circulating in the economy, laundered 1,000 times over. Maybe you've even held a note that was once in those mailbags. But the real question isn't how they spent the money. It's about the one man who walked away scot-free. If the Ulster Man really was just a quiet postal worker, why did he never spend a dime? Thanks for watching. And let me know in the comments, do you think Ronnie Biggs was a folk hero or just a lucky thug?